David Goldfein. A 1983 graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, General Goldfein's distinguished career includes commanding a squadron, a group, an F-16 wing. He later commanded the F-117 Stealth Fighter Wing. General Goldfein has also commanded U.S. Air Force's Central Command, acting as the Air Component Commander to the Commander of U.S. Central Command, and leading all air operations in the Middle East. Now, I have to admit to the General, last year I was sitting right over here on the side next to General Willie Shelton when he announced that he was going to bring all of the air chiefs from around the world to the Space Symposium. I'll never forget the look Willie gave me. He just looked over at me and smiled when that no way could I not realize that Willie was laughing inside going, I wonder what you're going to do now, man. I'll tell you, it was, I just knew that there was something that was going to have to be special with this. But General, I want to tell you, we are really honored that you have all your fellow air chiefs here from around the world to conduct an International Air Chiefs Conference in conjunction with the Space Symposium. Your staff has been amazing and worked with us well on this. We are delighted to have you and look forward to your panel this afternoon. And please join me in welcoming the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, General David Goldfein.
Sister start.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Liftoff.
And we have liftoff. Engine cooling water activated.
Well, howdy. It is a great day to be an airman in the world's greatest Air Force. So I flew in last night from a visit to Joint Base San Antonio, otherwise known in my family as God's country, where I stopped in to see 103-year-old Lieutenant Colonel retired Dick Cole, who was in ICU at our San Antonio Medical Center. And I told him our Air Force was thinking about him and his family because we're so proud to carry the torch that he and his fellow Raiders handed us. And he couldn't speak, but he grasped my hand firmly and he nodded his approval. Sadly, just before taking the stage, I took a call from his son, Rich, who shared that there's another hole in our formation. And our last remaining Doolittle Raider has slipped the surly bonds of earth and is now reunited with his fellow Raiders. And what a reunion they must be having. We all know Colonel Cole as Jimmy Doolittle's co-pilot of the first aircraft that launched off the USS Hornet on the famed Doolittle raid on the 18th of April, 1942. 77 years ago this Saturday. Those 80 intrepid airmen changed the course of history as they executed a one-way mission without hesitation against enormous odds. And 2 years ago, when we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the raid at our Air Force Museum, I asked Colonel Cole what it felt like to be flying blind for so many hours, low on gas, after they'd hit their targets trying to make it to the Chinese coastline without a beacon to guide them. And he offered, well, General, it sure would have been nice to have had GPS back then. You know, we're going to miss Colonel Cole, and we offer our eternal thanks and our condolences to his family. The legacy of the Doolittle Raiders will live forever in the hearts and minds of airmen, long after we've all departed. May we never forget the long blue line, because it's who we are. As we flew in yesterday, I looked over and saw our beloved Air Force Academy and those 17 magnificent steeples of the chapel pointing forever skyward. And when I was a cadet, I was told those spires represented the 12 apostles and the 5 original chiefs of staff. Hey, what did I know? And I looked down and I reminisced about standing in the field house in the summer of 1978 with my classmate, Cadet Heather Wilson, as we took our first oath of office together. One of us went on to graduate in just 4 years, became a Rhodes Scholar, ran her own business, became a congresswoman for 9 years, and then became a college president of a premier STEM university. And one of us didn't. This symposium is the first large gathering of airmen and industry since Secretary Wilson announced her departure to return to academia as the president of the University of Texas at El Paso. And how appropriate that her last official act as our secretary will be to graduate the class of 2019 at the Academy with the President of the United States as our graduation speaker, where it all started. And once again, she is graduating a year ahead of me. So I just want to say publicly that we are a better and more lethal and more ready Air Force because of the vision, the leadership, and the passion of our Secretary, Dr. Heather Wilson. Ma'am, we're going to miss you. So I want to welcome my fellow international air chiefs who've gathered for our first ever Air Chiefs Conference on space. As defense leaders of our respective nations, we recognize the strategic importance of the space domain has on our economies, our technology, our national security, and our collective defense. So we've gathered to discuss our shared interests in space in order to preserve access to this domain for the future of mankind. And I want to thank you all for coming to this important forum. And I'm really looking forward to our panel discussion later today. And for all gathered here, this is a first for this symposium, and you don't want to miss it. As Secretary Wilson mentioned earlier, right now across town at Schriever Air Force Base, 7 airmen are flying a constellation of GPS satellites providing position, navigation, and timing for every human on the planet. Talk about a no-fail mission. It's one of so many examples of why Secretary Wilson and I, along with other space leaders, properly claim that we are the best in the world in space. Last November, just over a month prior to China landing on the far side of the moon, NASA landed on the far side of Mars, its 8th landing. A month later, a spacecraft launched from the United States called OSIRIS-REx began orbiting an asteroid intending to land on it, collect samples, and return to Earth. And we've led manned spaceflight for years. Air Force Colonel Nick Hague and his Army teammate, Lieutenant Colonel Ann McLean, are currently orbiting in the International Space Station with their Russian and Canadian teammates. It was a few years ago I was serving as the deployed Air Component Commander and the Space Coordinating Authority in U.S. Central Command. And one night I'm sitting in my quad talking to a couple of my generals, then Major General Jim Jones and Major General Todd Walters, the current nominee to become Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And the phone in my room rang. And when I answered, a rather excited local operator at LUD had asked me if I would take a call from the International Space Station. And I answered, well, not collect. And on the other end, speaking as clearly as I am right now, was Colonel Ronnie Guerin, a battle buddy I flew combat with in Operation Desert Storm. And he told me he was flying over Qatar and just wanted to call and check in. So I put him on speaker, and we turned off the lights, and sure enough, we're pretty sure we looked up and found him with a set of night vision goggles as he flew by. And then together we all pondered how the four of us, young captains together at the weapons school at Nellis years before, just one step ahead of the law, grew up to command all deployed air and space forces in the Middle East and the International Space Station. The long blue line. We're the best in the world at space. But our adversaries know it. And as Acting Secretary Shanahan properly stated, since Desert Storm, they've studied our ways and invested in means to deny us access to space capabilities in crisis or conflict. Our job is to never let that happen, so we can maintain space as a peaceful domain where common interests can align and flourish. Our President is leading the discussion. The Vice President has resurrected the National Space Council that lay dormant for years. Congress is debating the future of space. Industry is energized as space becomes a place for profit and competition. And our allies and partners are talking about it, highlighted by our Air Chief Conference this week. This is an exciting time to be an airman who is passionate about space superiority. Because working together, we must maintain freedom of action in space for all by deterring aggression or an attack. The old math equation of deterrence hasn't changed over the years. It's capability times will. And we must have both. And the time symbol is important. It's not a plus. Because like the math equation, if either side is zero, it amounts to zero. Like operations in any of the global commons of air, space, cyber, and the maritime domain, adversaries must understand that we will not hesitate to act if threatened, and that collectively with our allies and partners, we possess the capabilities to make the cost far greater than any perceived value if access to and use of the global commons are threatened. Capability times will. The math hasn't changed. So going forward, I see three lines of effort. We must work together as allies and as partners, which will form the framework of our discussions at the Air Chiefs Conference. First, we have to protect and defend what we have in space, because it's going to be there for a while, and we all depend on it. We must harden our networks, build resilience in our systems, enhance existing capabilities as we improve information sharing in areas like satellite communications and missile warning. Second, it's not enough to step into the ring and just bob and weave, block and parry, and absorb punches. At some point, we've got to hit back. And adversaries must know we possess this capability. So we'll rapidly develop and field the technology needed to counter adversary systems from any domain at the time, place, and manner of our choosing. Always the predator, never the prey. And third, we must stay laser focused on building the professional force we need to fight and win should a conflict start or extend into space. This year we'll graduate our first class of Schriever Scholars as we expand education on space to include junior officer, enlisted, and as Secretary Wilson highlighted, a growing number of international students. As we talk about the technology, we must never forget that our asymmetric advantage has always been and always will be our people. Our adversaries may be investing in space capabilities, But there is one space advantage we have that they will never match. They don't have General J. Raymond. We can all be incredibly proud that President Trump has nominated our finest joint warfighter to command U.S. Space Command. And I will tell you, as a philosophy major who took 6 years to graduate from the Air Force Academy, when I think about potential adversaries who might be pondering taking on J. Raymond in space, I think about a quote from a great American philosopher, Mr. T, who famously said, "I pity the fools." Our primary goal is the responsible, peaceful, and open use of space for all. And we do this by creating military capabilities that underwrite deterrence, preventing war from extending to space, just as we continue our work to do so in the air, at sea, and in the cyber domains, the global commons. Because historically, those with allies win. And America's greatest strength has always been its ability to attract partners with common interests. 78 years ago today, America and Denmark signed a basing agreement with Greenland for what became Thule Air Force Base. And nearly 8 decades later, we're tracking and commanding satellites with our partners. That's what's different about us. We prefer the power of collaboration over coercion. We're breaking down stovepipes and reducing the redundancy of our command and control. And there's no greater confidence builder than sharing critical and timely intelligence and information with our partners. And just as important as these capabilities are, it's the ideas that matter, that put them into practice. It's the diversity of thought and backgrounds that will always improve the outcome, because we're better together. And it's on us to ensure that building partner capacity is always a two-way street. We must be humble and understand that we have as much to learn as we have to offer. Because our achievements in space will be propelled by the power of our collaboration. And who knows? The seeds of our success to deter future conflict might very well be planted at this symposium, born out of relationships that we create here. This is what will make the difference in the 21st century, building a winning team able to integrate warfighting capabilities from all domains. In August of 1995, a conversation took place in the office of then President Slobodan Milosevic in Belgrade, Serbia. Ambassador Richard Holbrooke was dispatched to try and dissuade Milosevic from supporting genocide actions in Bosnia. And by his side was Lieutenant General Mike Short, the airman who would lead the NATO air campaign if deterrence failed. And at one point in the conversation, General Short told President Milosevic, "In one hand, I have a U-2. In the other, I have a B-2. You're going to have to choose which one I employ." President Milosevic chose unwisely, and his country suffered the consequences. Our job is to ensure potential adversaries choose wisely, that they know we have the collective capability and the will to act if threatened, that the peaceful use of space is in every nation's best interest, that leaders always choose to deal with the president's lead diplomat and never choose to deal with J. Raymond. So let me close with a very personal final story. 20 years ago next month, I expertly and successfully intercepted an enemy surface-to-missile with my aircraft while flying an F-16 over Serbia. Yes, a brilliant tactical maneuver. But that night on the ground, deep inside enemy territory, the power of space came to life for me, providing key information to the team that came to my rescue. Everything from my communications to GPS tracking to ISR assets that were used to hone into my location to the position navigation and timing that guided us back to friendly territory. They all relied on the space domain. That night, my life depended on a joint and combined team, international partners, working together with the interagency, bringing space capabilities to bear to execute a successful rescue mission. And I stand before you today as the 21st Chief of Staff as a direct result. We're the best in this space because we collaborate with partners to make the world a better place for our children and for our grandchildren. It's our calling, and it's why we serve. Driven by the power of our collaboration and only limited by the constraints of our imagination. May God bless the nations that we serve and those like Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cole and the airmen standing the watch as I speak in places like Thule and Kwajalein and Cavalier and Kobani, who always have and always will defend them. Fight's on. Thank you very much.